So, Shabbat Shalom. We are here to praise God, but most particularly when we do this, we bring blessing and praise to ourselves. And when we have a minyan of 10 or more, our prayers manifest energy that helps to uplift all the world. And it's always comforting to think that wherever, in whatever time zone one might be, Jews all over the place are doing exactly what we're doing right now. They're in services and shuls and synagogues and temples, or they're at home kindling the lights of Shabbat and having a meal with their family. And this is what connects us. This is what makes us all connected family. Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, and Am Yisrael Chai, may it always live and be under the umbrella of Adonai. Limits and order. We are a people of the book. A book which outlines our history, our ancestry, our behavior, both good and bad, and serves as an instruction guide for how to live our best lives. The Torah sets out rules and parameters and actually, yes, limits to what we should and what we should not do. It serves as a tool to help bring order to the chaos inherent in our daily lives and the fragile nature of humanity as a whole. We are always subject to temptation. The Yetzer Harav and the Yetzer HaTov are inclination toward evil or good. Sometimes we unknowingly transgress, and at other times, well, maybe we actively chose a path that will lead to more chaos and ultimate devastation, heartache, or ruin. Has anyone ever done that? Adam and Eve had been told not to eat from the tree of knowledge, but they chose to do it anyway and created chaos and pain for generations to come. But free will has a price, and it can be both a blessing and a curse. Our Parsha this Shabbat, Parsha Shemini, relates to the very last details of ritual purity, the wrapping up of the construction of the Mishkan and the beginning of worship. This is our Mishkan Tefillah. It was their beginning of worship. Aaron's two oldest sons in this Parsha, it's very famous for this, they get carried away. They're so enlightened in their own connection to the divine, they get a moment of ecstasy, and it is said that they were just so totally off the rails for many different reasons, lots of different commentary, that they were just completely burnt up and consumed because they offered up an alien, strange fire. Now, Aaron was in shock. It is said that he was in such shock that he actually couldn't even speak. Now, this was supposed to be a celebration, and suddenly it has turned into a horrific tragedy. Much, as I said, has been written about this. To quote Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, some say that they wanted to lead the people and were impatiently waiting for Moses and Aaron to die. So they wanted to usurp them. They wanted to get in there and assert their prominence in their youth and to take over. Others say that their sin was that they actually never married because they thought that no woman was actually good enough for them. And then, most people say, they were drunk. Although some people who are really ecstatic can appear to be drunk. Others say that they did not ask for guidance as to what they should do and what they were not allowed to do on this day. So they were arrogant in their behavior. Yet another explanation is that they entered the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest was permitted to go. The simplest answer, though, is actually the one found in the Torah's description of the story. They offered strange fire that was not commanded. Now, it is likely that in this time of great celebration, they were carried away by the mood of the moment. They were caught up in the sheer excitement of the opening of the first collective house of worship in the history of Abraham's children. They wanted to do something extra, uncommanded, to express their religious fervor, but they went too far. They should have followed the instructions that were given to them. He goes on to explain that as priests, they were held to a different sort of accountability. Their life was one of rules and order. There was no room for spontaneous actions or spontaneous judgments outside of that which was commanded and outlined, dictated by God. Rabbi Sachs cites the example of Moses smashing the tablets and King David dancing with ecstasy. Moses was a prophet. David was a king. But Nadav and Abihu, Aaron's children, they were priests. Prophets and kings sometimes act spontaneously because they both inhabit the physical world of time. They understand the mood of the moment and what it calls for. Moshe knew that only something as dramatic as shattering the tablets would bring the people to their senses and convey to them how grave was their sin. David knew that by dancing alongside the Holy Ark, he would express to the people a sense of significance of what was happening. That Jerusalem was about to become not just the political capital, but also the spiritual center of the nation. These acts of precisely judged spontaneity were essential in the shaping and the destiny of the people. But priests, they have a different role altogether. They dwell in a different kind of realm. The daily, weekly, and yearly sacrifices were always the same. Every element of the service of the Mishkan was bound by its own detailed rules, and nothing of significance was left to the discretion of the priest. The priest was the guardian of order. It was his job to maintain boundaries between sacred and secular, pure and impure, perfect and blemished, permitted and forbidden. The priestly vocation was to remind the people, yes, there are limits. There is an order to the universe, and we must respect it. Spontaneity has no place in the life of a priest, and that is what Nadav and Abihu, they failed to honor. Now, it might have seemed like a minor transgression, but it was in fact a negation of everything the Mishkan and the priesthood stood for. Now, I say all that aside, it is horrific that Aaron should lose his two sons like this, after all he had done and given in the service of God. As I said, he was just so shocked he couldn't even speak, deep to his core. Now, much of the Torah relays moments of impatience, sacrifice, frustration, intense loss, punishment, and yes, too, reward. Life isn't easy, yet at times it is us that make it difficult. Maybe we act spontaneously in a moment that changes our course for decades, for better or worse. Has anyone ever experienced that? Sometimes we can be our own worst enemies in relationships, in jobs, with our choices and how we behave. Moses may have smashed the tablets by choice to make a statement, as Rabbi Sachs suggests, and he wasn't immediately punished. But some cite that that very momentary choice was one of the reasons that he did not get into the promised land, even after all he did for God and the Jewish people. Others say it's because he smashed that rock with his staff to bring forth water in a moment of intensity and possibly frustration and anger. Or maybe it wasn't either of those examples. Maybe it's just that the next generation was more equipped for what was to come. Maybe new ideas were necessary to lead the next generation without the burden of past historical choices, baggage, and destructive behaviors. After all, the original celebration, well, that was quite a thing. But as you look at this whole generation and everything they experienced, none of them got in. None of those that were there at the moment of the Exodus. They could not free themselves from that slave mentality. Ultimately, the lesson we may learn and take away from this parsha is that our actions have consequences. Some so severe that they affect the course of our lives and can cause great pain to others. That there may be times when we question God's actions and maybe feel that the punishment doesn't ever really quite own up to the crime, or that the pain that we are meant to endure seems unjustified, out of whack, and brutal. We cannot truly understand that which we cannot see. We can only surmise. We can choose to be struck silent by the horror and the depth of our sorrow or our doubt. Or we can try to have faith that there are reasons beyond our knowing, that there is some order in the universe meant to guide our daily lives, guide our experiences, and guide our relationships. If we act without thought, yes, there will be consequences. There are limits, there are rules established to maintain order. And yes, too, even access to all that is spiritual and pure and good and holy. The choice is always ours. We have the power to create hardship or glory. Some things we can control, like ourselves, and some things we can't. As we enter the month of Passover, on this Shabbat HaChodesh, let us think about when we may have actually crossed a line. When do we honor the limits, and when do we push them? When has that worked for us, and when has it not? As we begin the process of purging ourselves from that which puffs us up, like the chametz we are meant to eradicate from our lives, let us think about how our behaviors can bring chaos and when our behavior can set us free. May God be with us through this process, and may we find purity. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will. Shabbat Shalom.